I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane, broadcasting from the Marcus Garvey House here in North Minneapolis. And you know, it's all about the neighborhood. This is a conversation about how we build our community, our neighborhood, house by house, family by family. We're focusing on business creation, business development, economic development, and culture. It's a wonderful conversation, a robust conversation. One of the guides for this conversation is my brother, who takes us on a musical journey, Wayne McFarlane and jazz. Check him out. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Today's program continues exploring economic development and opportunity in our community. I'm pleased to have guests who are eminently qualified to discuss this topic. As always, we promise robust conversation. Joining me today, William English, Bill English, one of the elders of the community, leader of the Coalition of Black Churches African American Leadership Summit. Bill, thank you for being here. Also, Scott Gray. Scott Gray is the CEO, president of Minneapolis Urban League. Wanda F. Kirkpatrick is director for diversity and equal opportunity at Metropolitan Council, and she's here on behalf of Ted Mondale, head of the Metropolitan Sports Facilities Commission. Thank you for being here, Wanda. And Readus Fletcher is deputy director of the City of St. Paul, Department of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity, and here on behalf of Deputy Mayor Paul Williams. Thank you for being here. Let me start with you, Readus, and you, Wanda. There's a lot of money on the table right now in terms of development in the city of St. Paul and Minneapolis, also in the metro region. We've got the Viking Stadium, big money. We've got the transit, LRT, between Minneapolis and St. Paul, big money. A St. Paul Stadium, big money. The question is, how do we ensure that our communities, Black people, communities of color, participate in the revenues these developments mean? What are you all doing, Readus, first of all, to ensure and to invite and to encourage engagement and participation?
Yeah, well, first let me thank you for hosting this conversation, Al. And as I said, as you mentioned, I'm here for Deputy Mayor Paul Williams, but I'm also representing HREEO, we call it, Department of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity. What that department is that we do all the buying for the city of St. Paul. We also do it for Ramsey County and some other jurisdictions. By buying, I mean we buy everything from the brick and mortar for the city of St. Paul to food for the zoos. We buy paper. We buy about $300 million worth of stuff every year. We also do all the contract compliance associated with the buying that we do, or opportunities that the city and its partners generate. By opportunities, I mean development opportunities where we partner with a private developer to put up some new housing or create some new commercial space that we as the city couldn't do alone because we don't have the money. But we partner with other private entities to make those development happen. Our department has the responsibility to ensure that the business opportunities and the employment opportunities that are being generated out of these opportunities are inclusive. We have local ordinances, local laws that are in place that we manage to ensure that the business opportunities that actually come out are afforded in the minority business community. The jobs that are going to be created are available and accessible by people of our community, and in particular those people that are hardest hit by some of these economic disparities that we're all certainly going to be talking about. The centerpin activities, as you mentioned, that are going on, of course, is the light rail. That's a tremendous economic engine. It is going to be bringing development to the city of St. Paul. It is going to further development along the outside quarters of the light rail. It's going to provide access to jobs and opportunities that heretofore have not been able, people of our inner cities have not been able to get to because of the whole travel distance. It's a tremendous engine that's coming through the St. Paul. We have a new regional ballpark that's going to come in. It's going to create a number of jobs, it's going to create a number of business opportunities, and it's going to create some additional ongoing jobs. Our job, our department, is to ensure, again, accessibility to minority businesses and accessibility to residents of St. Paul, low-income residents of St. Paul, and minority residents of St. Paul, to those jobs that are going to be there.
Let me shift it to the regional level, and the Metro Council, I think, represents the same issues and partners, actually, with St. Paul and the Minneapolis on many of the same projects. Wanda, what's the story in the Metropolitan community, the Metropolitan map? First of all, transit. Secondly, the Vikings Stadium. What's the outlook, the prospect for inclusion and engagement of Black and minority and women-owned businesses, and for workers to get jobs on those projects?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you for being here.
The first one that I'd like to talk about is the Metropolitan Council. The Metropolitan Council is the regional governing body for our 7-county region here. And we are responsible for transit, for environmental services, for planning, and for parks and recreation, for the regional parks that we have here. And in the building, in the construction area, is where we do a lot of our work, where women and minority companies, where women and minorities can be a part of the workforce. So at the moment, as Readus said just now, we are the agency that is building the Central Corridor Light Rail. In the Central Corridor Light Rail, depending on what the scope of work is, whether it is actual construction or whether it is in the design, depends on the goals that we have set for those projects for business. Those goals that we have set come from the federal program, the Federal Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. For Central Corridor, for example, the AECOM, which is the design group for the construction, is their goal is 17%. At the moment, they are meeting that goal plus 0.9, 17.9. And then for the construction of the project, we have several contractors that we're using. And because we wanted to ensure that Minnesota companies could participate and not just one big conglomerate, we divided up the contract. And so that there would be smaller sections, so that smaller companies could bid and be a part of it. And for those projects, we have a 15% goal. All of our contractors are either at, above, at, or a 0.1% below meeting that goal. But they are all committed to meeting the goal by the end of the contract. We have been working with a group of citizens, a group of agencies, et cetera, to ensure that the meeting of the goal for the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program has been open and transparent. As far as the workforce on Central Corridor Light Rail, the goals were set by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. The Minnesota Department of Human Rights in the state of Minnesota is the one who is responsible by law for making sure that those goals are adhered to. Again, the goals for Central Corridor are 18% minority and 6% women. The contractors that are working on, the construction contractors that are working on that project are, again, meeting that, above that goal, those goals, meeting those goals, are hundreds of % behind the goal. So we ensure that by making sure that everyone knows, the community, the agencies, the contractors, everyone knows what is happening. As far as, that's just one of the things right now that the Metropolitan Council is doing. I must say, though, that that's not the only thing that the Metropolitan Council is doing, but I think for this conversation, that is one of the most important things. We are getting ready to start the Southwest Corridor, which we will have the same kind of open, transparent workings for women and minority participation, whether it be DBE, or whether it be workforce, on that Central Corridor project, on the Southwest project. We also have projects in our wastewater treatment, which in the next 10 years should be over $1 billion worth of work. And so we have those same kinds of compliance requirements, because it is an Environmental Protection Agency, federal money, and so we will be doing the same kinds of things with those projects. Now, if I could talk a little bit about the authority, and you're probably wondering, why is someone from the Metropolitan Council talking about the authority? Well, because we have such a really good program, the authority went out looking for someone who could help them understand the process. And they came to us, and we graciously said, of course we can help you understand the process. So my colleague Aaron Koski and I are executives on loan to the authority. And so we've been helping them with the process.
This is Metropolitan Sports Facilities Authority.
Authority, that is correct. So the authority working under Ted Kennedy. Oh my goodness, Ted Mondale and Michelle Helgen. We're working together to help them with their program. So far, the only things that they've been doing is the design, the architectural design, et cetera. In that, there is no workforce that comes with that. That comes with the construction. But with the disadvantaged business enterprises, we've been helping them to facilitate meeting many disadvantaged business enterprises that have to do with design, architecture, engineering, etc. So we have been helping them to get to know those companies and get them to be a part of their process.
One of the numbers that comes up to me, and maybe it doesn't apply to these construction or the transit projects, but the last time I interviewed Kevin from the Human Rights Department, they were announcing the goals of, I think, 35%, 32%. So how does that apply to the 18% that you mentioned for the light rail?
The light rail was started way before that work had been done.
So it's from this point on?
It's from this point on.
Okay.
And that 32% will count towards the Viking Stadium.
But not Southwest Corridor?
It will count towards Southwest Corridor also.
Let me bring Bill English in. Bill, you have been at the forefront of negotiating and of trying to encourage awareness, getting our community knowledgeable and positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that these developments can and should mean. The backdrop is that there's been a historic exclusion of our people. I want you to sort of detail the background. What was the lay of the land 20 years ago, and when and how have things changed to where we are today, and where do we need to go still so that we have a genuine playing field that's even and that ensures and assures fairness, equity, and opportunity? What do you think?
A couple of things that I would like. First of all, it's good to be here with I've known Readus when we were both, he didn't have as much gray hair, and I hadn't shaved mine off. Right, exactly. So, and certainly I welcome the representative from the Metro Council, which has an enormous amount of respect for their work. And of course, Scott Gray, a colleague and a friend from the Urban League, which has historic interest in this kind of effort. But I must explain that my background comes from the private sector, where I was general manager, vice president of equal opportunity for a company called Control Data that paved the way, that received national recognition for this kind of work. I remember when we gave the largest contract to an African-American-owned electric company, Leon Rankin, whom you will know, an old urban leaguer, and Bernie Battle, for the building of the World Distribution Center, which is now owned by St. Paul Public Schools at Selma and Dale. So I don't come as a neophyte to this work. So I need to say this, from a historic perspective, nothing counts but results. Nothing counts but results. And I think historically in Minnesota, we were satisfied with a goal, which is not a quota. We've been satisfied. I had a colleague of mine once say in St. Louis, where I grew up on the east side of the river, that said to me, "What's wrong with you people in Minnesota?" He's now a congressman. I won't call his name. I don't want to embarrass him. But he said, I understand that people in Minnesota can't work on highway construction. He said, I've driven through there because he loved to fish. I never see black people working on construction. And he was right. And so you know the recent struggles with MnDOT, and I think they've made some movement. I'm not ready to praise them. I come to bury them, because I don't think they've reached there yet. But to this extent, I think there is a new level of consciousness, and I think there's a firmer commitment. But it won't matter if we don't end up with appropriate results. So that's the historic perspective. And I like to say this. Recently, I was part of a private consultant to a local construction firm that built the new Minneapolis headquarters. One of the things that we chose to do,
Minneapolis
public school headquarters on Broadway, to our community. Thanks to people like Scott, we first of all lobbied to get the school board to make the right decision, to put their headquarters in our community, and then lobbied to make sure that the contractor delivered, and they did. One of the things that we did, we posted our numbers, and that was directly coming from me. I said, why do we have to be afraid? Post our numbers right on the site so everybody can see them. My next struggle is to get them, and I know the law does not require us to break down those ethnic groups. See, we cloud the numbers by saying minority, people of color, and women. We cloud the results by doing it. Now, the law does not require that we break them out, and I respect the law. But nothing should prevent us from a local jurisdiction saying, no, we're not ashamed of our numbers. We're going to talk about African Americans. They're different. The Native community, which has historic presence in this state, and the new Latino community and the Asian community. We shouldn't be afraid to publish our numbers and not cloud them with minorities, because that sends a different picture. So I respect the fact that we need to break those down, but I'm going to be urging the authority to break those down, both St. Paul and the regional stadium and the new Viking stadium. We need to break those numbers out so that people can consume. Because one of the things our community does not believe, and they have good reason not to believe, that they don't see our people there and they don't believe that they're, and that allows the dissidents to always challenge, well, they're lying. I know, I want to commend St. Paul. When the building of Excel Center, they met their objectives. That was a good outcome. The library, it started under Mayor Sharon Sells Belton from a historic, when we did the convention center. She told Mortensen, if you're going to do this contract, you better have some minority partners, and they better be visible, and they need to be on more than just public jobs. That's the other leverage we could bring. Tell us what you don't do on what you're doing with minorities and women on non-public jobs. We have the right, when we're spending that kind of money, to ask those questions.
Sure. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll continue in a minute talking with Bill English, Scott Gray, Wanda Kirkpatrick, and Readus Fletcher. The topic of discussion is economic development, opportunity, jobs for our people. Stay tuned.
Horn blow. Walk on by, 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 by. By, by, by. Walk on. Skip, dip, 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 dip. If you see me cry, yeah, and I don't know, oh, what's went wrong with my baby tonight. Walk on. Bye, 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 bye. Bye, bye. Walk on. Skip, dip, 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 dip. Love that you gave me was not so sincere. Dreams and your kisses and your love, girl, when you said goodbye. Wanna say, walk on by. Walk on by, 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 by. By, by, by. Walk on by. Let's just walk. Walk. Walk, 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 walk. When you walk on by, on by. 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 When you walk on. Don't you pass me by, well, don't you pass me by. You're time of my life, you're gonna walk all over me. Yeah, 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 yeah. The love that you gave me was not so sincere. Dreams and your kisses and your love, girl, when you said goodbye. I wanna say, walk on by. Walk on by, 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 by. By, by, by. Walk on by. This ain't some.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome back to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Continue talking about development, economic development for our community. I want to invite Scott Gray, CEO, President of Minneapolis Urban League, to jump in this conversation. Scott, you've got a mission of delivering workforce opportunity and creating wealth for our community. One of the things that I heard in a meeting, I'm not sure if it was from you or from Lewis King, but there was an analysis of what happens when goals are set. Say the project is $1 billion. The goal is, just for a round figure, 10% or 20%. That's $200 million, right? And what if we accept good faith and we only achieve 5% participation? Then that's 15% of the money that's left on the table that somebody else is getting. And the question has to be raised, where is our money?
Absolutely.
Why aren't we getting our money? What do we do about that situation?
Well, thanks for the invite. I feel grateful to be around a table that has this much wisdom. But I would just say that it's reflective in the numbers. When you look at the unemployment rate here in this town for people of color, specifically African Americans, we're talking over 25%. And we're talking about a low unemployment rate altogether in this town at 5%. And so when you talk about leaving money on the table, you're leaving people that want to work these projects, want to have these opportunities, that just don't get a chance to get out there and do what they want to do, which is have meaningful work and a career opportunity. And so we got to work harder with this. We hear from contractors we can't find them, help us. But in some cases, we hear when the project is almost complete. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening these days, which is a lot of work that is going on behind the scenes from Metro Council and St. Paul and Minneapolis, we are starting to get up front to really start to understand what the project, what's going on with the project, so that we can start to prepare folks at the Urban League and OIC and other organizations right now. I mean, right now, we're talking about employing almost 300 folks at the Viking Stadium. So we're preparing about 100 folks a year just from Minneapolis Urban League. And these are folks that will have not just this project, we want them to move into a career ladder opportunity, making sure that construction is an area that they can have gainful employment. So when we talk about those goals, this 32% goal, this is a very aggressive goal. And so if we don't meet this goal, I would suggest, and I would say, and we're going to say this from the Urban League, that contractors need to be paying into some type of pot
as a penalty.
As a, well, maybe we shouldn't call it a penalty. Maybe we should call it a training budget for the future.
Or trust.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so I would think that we can do, there's things like that going on in Chicago and other places. If contractors want to say that we don't have the people, let's start training for the future, because we're talking almost about multi-billion dollars worth of projects over the next just 2 years. And then Wanda just mentioned $10 billion with the water treatment. And so I think this is a great opportunity to be looking to get more folks into training, to get more folks into career ladder opportunities, so we don't have to leave that money on the table, Al. We don't intend to do it for the stadium, and we don't intend to do it for some of these other projects that are coming up.
But Bill English, what happened in the past? I mean, I used to be upset that we would let companies and even government, the city of Minneapolis, city of St. Paul, the Metro Council, off the hook when they would say, oh, we tried, we had good faith efforts, and we were expected to simply accept that, which is unacceptable. What happened?
Well, first of all, historically, good faith has meant we made a good effort. We tried to do the recruiting and that sort of thing. And that was, if you demonstrated you ran an ad, that would be accepted as good faith. But I think we have moved. In all fairness, I think we've moved beyond that now. As I started my previous statement, it has to do with results. Now, I want to make the argument there is not a lack of qualified people. Absolutely. And let me be very specific about that. They're doing oil in North Dakota. Right. Wilson is recruiting people from all over the country. If the roof of the university or city hall blew in a tornado or whatever, blew off, they'd find a way to find the qualified workers to get there. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with recruiting workers from anywhere in the country to get it. And we know the South is full of qualified tradespeople where they don't have unions and are unable to do that. But by paying organizations like the Urban League to recruit those people and bring them here, just as they did for the architectural firm. Hello, the architectural firms were recruited from around the country. They submitted an application, and an out-of-town company received it. We have to do the same thing with workforce and subcontractors. It's not just the workers, but it's the subcontractors. I once made a joke that if given the opportunity, you know I did some recruiting in my early days. You give me the opportunity, give me 3 weeks, I'll find a purple-haired, blue-eyed, left-handed nuclear physicist, okay? That's black, because they're out there.
But you gotta wanna find them.
You gotta wanna find them, and you gotta have the people who know how to find them. That is the test I think these new projects present to us.
I wanted to jump in here.
Yes, I'd love to. I'm just chomping at the bit to do this. I have said to my folks, I don't ever want a contractor again coming to us saying, I can't find anybody. That is unacceptable. And so one of the things that we have done is devised a database called LRT Works. LRT Works has folks in the database who are qualified now, today, from Minnesota, actually, who can do this work. And we get the folks who come out of the Urban League. We go to the Urban League to get them to sign up to be in LRT Works. So no contractor ever again can tell me we can't do that. And we are going to take that information and those things that we have learned from Central Corridor to the authority to help them to understand you can't say either, I can't find anyone, because we're going to work not only with the Urban League and the OICs and the Merricks and the Goodwill Institution. Yes, we're going to work with all of those folks to ensure that we have the trained people to do it. No longer, and I've said this before on your show, no longer do you just pick folks up off the corner and say, come work on my construction site. You have to know what you're doing. I'm sure, Al, you wouldn't want an electrician who doesn't know what they're doing setting up a light rail system or doing the lights in the stadium, because we don't know if that's going to work or not, and then what would happen. And so we do want those folks to be trained and ready to go. That is strictly important. And when you talk, let's talk a little bit about what you said before about the money. When you hire folks who are electricians, when you hire folks who are the big rig operators, when you hire folks like that, they garner, the plumbers, they garner more money. When you hire the folks that are the strict laborers, they don't garner as high a dollar salary. So what we want to do from the urban leagues, from the OICs, is get folks trained in some of those other things, because we don't want just laborers to be making up the goal. We want folks to come to this with up and down the ladder, and we want them to come with the idea of being in a career, not just a job on LRT, a job on the Viking
Scott,
Stadium.
that's what you said, right?
Absolutely. I think too, though, I think it was important in the legislation to make sure that community organizations that we host, you know, folks call them job fairs, but I call them relationship fairs, relationship opportunities for people to meet the prime contractors, the subcontractors, and understand what the work is out there and who and what the profile is needed to get onto one of these projects and to move into a career ladder
That's been
opportunity.
very successful.
Read us in here.
I just wanted, and this is great conversation, and I want to keep it going, but I just want to go back to something that Bill and then Scott had mentioned also. First, we rarely talk about why we have these goal-setting programs. Why are they there? I mean, they ain't there really because we just want to do the good thing. I mean, the fact of the matter is that all of us have had disparity studies that have shown in the city of St. Paul, in the city of Minneapolis, within the state of Minnesota, minority businesses are being discriminated against. I mean, and that's why we have these goal-setting programs, because we participate in the disparity study. First examines the private marketplace. It finds that there's discrimination in the private marketplace. I'm the public sector. I buy from the private sector. I'm a passive participant then, therefore, in that discrimination. I can't do that because I'm an equal opportunity taxer. So I'm there for lawsuits. So, you know, these disparity studies first established that when we talk about historical, no, it's today. Discrimination is going on today, and that's why we're required. We are required. You know, there's no choice about it. We got to have programs of remediation. I want to also talk about, again, this idea, we got to do the best we can with our public jobs and our public efforts for economic development. But in the real scheme of things, that's a small piece of the pie. The jobs that are out there, the construction jobs that are out there, the employment jobs that are out there are in the private sector. And that's why it's important that we have to push hard to our companies. Don't play fair only when you're working with the government. Exactly. You got to play fair all the time.
How do you do that?
You got to push companies from our perspective to diversify their supplier chains beyond only when they're dealing with MedConsult or they're dealing with the city of St. Paul. That they've got to get their supplier, their contractors, their suppliers to be diverse. You know, we've got to push this public requirement, this public remediation into the private sector. When we do that, then we can start really impacting this disparity that we got.
That is so important, Readus. I want to go back to something that Scott raised, though, and it's a good point. Thank you for bringing up. We need to make certain that there is an investment in the kind of training. I like the idea. You don't achieve your goal, but that's why, for me, setting some ethnic goals are very important. So that if you hit your goal with New Egyptians, as one of my friends said, as opposed to African Americans, then you need to be talking about, well, if we need to increase the number of electricians, let's give a few scholarships and get some electrical apprentices. So I think Scott's idea is a wonderful idea that we need to explore. We've got a huge philanthropic community that sometimes like to give us money for programs, but won't give us money to invest in the kind of training that will lead to apprenticeships that we need to do. We need to be urging them, while this billions of dollars are being spent, invest some money in allowing us to create the training that we can provide so that when the contractor comes and says, I can't find anybody qualified, oh yeah, we got 15.
Shifting the mindset from charity to investment.
Exactly, and it's an investment as opposed to charity. And we need to remember around this table, as leaders in our community, Minnesota has the highest level of unemployment among qualified African Americans in the country. When I came here more than 40 years ago, I came here because it represented opportunity for African Americans. I came here to go to grad school and stay 2 years, and I stayed because 3M hired me as the first black salesman. Remember that. So it was opportunity there. That opportunity has disappeared because of the same reason that Readus said. There's discrimination, and the disparity studies show that in both the public and private sectors.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll continue in a few minutes. I'm going to ask one more person to join this conversation. Velma Korbel is the director of the Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights. We'll do that in a minute. Stay tuned.
Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, my girl, I want to be with you all night long. Percussion. Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, I want to be with you all night long. But you can't touch the peak. Close your eyes, but always you want to speak. You would sit there crying, say everything is alright. Play games with the devil, pray to God at night. Well, whether I'm right, whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, whether I'm wrong, I want to be with you all night long. Skip all the ID-day. Whether I'm right, oh, you know what I'm talking about. Whether I'm wrong, I've been wrong before. I want to be with you. I'm still going over your house all night long. You can call the shots, but you're too afraid to speak. Close your eyes, but always you want to be. You would die for your brother, but you would hate to bleed. Could have anything, but you don't know what you need. Am I right?
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome back to Conversations with Al McFarlane. We continue this robust conversation on economic development opportunity, job opportunity in the Twin Cities marketplace. We are joined now by Velma Korbel. She's Executive Director. She's Director of the Minneapolis Civil Rights Department. Velma, thank you for joining this conversation. We talked a few days ago about a lot of changes in Minneapolis. You've been leading a plan to, we'll be announcing soon, some new strategic initiatives to ensure inclusion and opportunity. Give us some background.
Tomorrow, at the meeting of the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Health Committee of the Minneapolis City Council, we'll be given an update on an equity resolution that was approved by the City Council back in August. The resolution that was approved back in August did direct staff to come back on October 24th to give an update of the progress that we've made so far. So tomorrow we're going back to tell the City Council that we have actually started to work on a draft of an equity assessment toolkit. It's modeled after the equity assessment toolkit used in the Seattle area, but it is going to be customized for equity assessment here in the city of Minneapolis. And we are looking at 3 primary areas to focus our equity work on. And those areas are employment, purchasing, and engagement. And as I was just listening to you from the wings earlier, the conversation was really exciting and dynamic, and I heard you talking about the hiring piece. And the city of Minneapolis, as was mentioned, has the worst employment disparity between whites and non-whites of any metropolitan area in the country. And that has been talked about for the past 2 years, as came down in a report from the Economic Policy Institute by an economist named Algernon Austin. And since that report came out, the first report in 2010, and then an update just recently, and dismayingly, the results have not changed. The metropolitan area still has the worst employment disparity between whites and non-whites. But the city has been focusing on that almost exclusively over the last couple of years, because this is, you want to be known as the best place in the country to live, work, and raise a family, but you certainly don't want to be known as having the worst employment disparity between whites and non-whites. And in Dr. Austin's report, it specified that the reasons for that gap in disparity between whites and non-whites, there were 3 primary reasons for that. There was the educational achievement gap was cited as one reason. The relative age of the minority labor force, meaning that the minority labor force has been, kind of the last hired, first fired sort of situation. And the other reason that was given was hiring bias, or just plain old discrimination. And so I was very encouraged to see through that Minneapolis resolution that was passed in August that the city was willing, and these are elected leaders, was willing to name discrimination as a reason for why the problem exists in our area, and were willing to be a leader in putting things in place that would help address that.
And so what are you going to do? What strategies are you considering to remedy the situation?
The first thing that we're going to do in looking at the hiring piece is look at what's going on in the city itself, because it's pretty difficult to say to someone on the outside of the city, do it this way, if we're not doing it the right way ourselves. And so we have got some pretty key positions in the city that need some looking after, as my mother would say. We have a position that is in the process of being filled in the city of Minneapolis right now that's probably the key position in the city, and that's the Director of Human Resources. And if we can't find a Director of Human Resources, and I don't see why it couldn't be someone from with a diverse background, or someone who is African American, Latino, whatever, we should be able to find an HR director who can help us put some strategies in place. So that's kind of the first thing. But the city is also talking about using its own purchasing power to leveraging its purchasing power to make sure that we are bringing in women and minority employees and women and minority businesses. For example, the city spends millions of dollars a year in its own direct purchasing, and we monitor in the Civil Rights Department about $500 million worth of contracts every year. that's a lot of potential if we would implement the goals that are already in place for women and minority business inclusion and for women and minority workforce. That could have a significant impact on the economic development in the communities of color.
This program has criticized the city aggressively in the past and charged that the city itself is in violation of city and state laws because it has consistently failed to deliver the results to achieve the goals that are mandated by legislation. And so right now you're saying the city appears to be taking more seriously the opportunity to do what's really right.
Absolutely. The resolution that was passed a month ago was not the first step that the city took. It's a significant step. But under the leadership of elected folk in the city, Mayor Ryback, 5th Ward Councilmember Don Samuels, Councilmember Cam Gordon, there are people in elected leadership who take this stuff really seriously and recognize that these are decades-old issues. You don't solve decades-old issues in a year or 2 years, but calling it, naming it, when a lot of institutions won't do that. Right. So the city recognizes that it is a discriminator. Now, it is not the only discriminator that has caused the problems that we're dealing with, but for the city to codify and to articulate that we know we are part of the problem and we're going to do whatever we can to the fullest extent that we can to remedy the situation is a big step. Now, the other thing with regard to the goals that have or have not been met in the city, I will fully admit to you that there have been a number of years in the last decade where the city has not done a good job. And you call it a crisis in leadership, call it apathy, call it whatever you want to call it. The fact is that the city was not adhering to its own goals that it had put in place. And over the last couple of years, we've been making some strides in that. So when we set a goal on something, we are holding contractors to it, whether it's for women and minority business inclusion or if it's for workforce. We're holding contractors to it, and it has only been in the last couple of years where the city has actually held contractors accountable for not doing what it is they were supposed to do, because prior to that it was, you're not doing what you're supposed to do, oh well. Right. We're really sorry about that. But
accountable means what?
That means, levying sanctions against those businesses to the extent that we can. Denying contracts.
Has it happened?
It happens often.
Okay.
Where a contractor will come in and say, well, yeah, right. it does. I can't find any, and we say, well, that's not true, because there are all kinds of places where there are businesses, there are workers that you can go and solicit and bring those people into your workforce or onto your contract, and they say we can't find them, and then we say, okay, well, some other people could. So you, business A, you don't get the contract. Business B did what it was supposed to do. So that's the person that's going to get the contract with the city.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we're talking about these disparities, we're talking about these disparities are regional. I mean, they're not bound by political jurisdictions. I mean, they go across the river, they go up north, they go south within the metropolitan area, and they are unconscionable. I mean, I'm born and raised here. My family's born and raised here. It's outrageous that Minnesota is leading the lottery in terms of economic and a number of other disparities that are in place. And what the city of St. Paul has done, and we're doing a lot of things also in conjunction with Minneapolis. There's a group called Everybody In, where we've got the private sector, we've got the public sector, we've got the philanthropic center. It's all behind this idea that these economic disparities are good for nobody. I mean, in the long run, the whole region, as testified by the Itasca Group, which is the Fortune 500 of the economic leadership here within our state, these economic disparities are going to stop the growth of this state. It is going to cause irreversible harm to our own economic vitality in this state, because in fact, people of color are going to be the workforce of the future. And unless we can get them, unless we correct these disparities, our whole region is at threat. And what we've done in St. Paul, I mean, additionally we're working with the Everybody In regional perspective, is that Mayor Chris Coleman created a whole new department because of the lack of success for inclusion in the city of St. Paul. We do $350 million a year. Previous to the mayor coming in, the city had done a miserable job, just like Minneapolis, in terms of itself, in terms of its contractors being inclusive. We created a new department under Chris Coleman that brings in all the procurement activities under one roof. And under that roof exists the contract compliance, our goal setting, our goal monitoring, our sanctioning. We do departments in St. Paul. So we have changed also how we do business under Chris Coleman.
Get out of line.
Yeah, well, in the city department also. The other thing about inclusion is good for all. I mean, the fact it gets back to this whole regional disparities. Inclusion is good for all. It's good for the, minorities, it's good for emerging businesses, it's good for the majority businesses.
One of the things, too, that I think is important to note, you know, I've been in this region now since the late 80s, and many of the people sitting around the table have been here for a while. Probably not Scott, because I think you came from the other side of the river. But one of the things that I feel compelled to make a change on this issue. I think there's momentum here. The layers have been peeled back. People are not afraid to say that there's something rotten in Denmark. You know, I've been here for a long time doing this work, and so I feel like I have been a little bit part of the problem, because I've worked for institutions that sort of, you know, perpetuated this, from the Metropolitan Council to the state of Minnesota, and now in the city of Minneapolis. And now where we have leadership that's galvanized to make a difference in where we are, I think we need to take every opportunity and just wrestle this problem to the ground, because too many of our people in the communities that have historically been on the margins and undisturbed are depending on us to do this right. And so we need to do that.
Because part of the challenge is, how do what I call legacy institutions then deliver the value, the breadth of their contact, and the scope of their service to the new economy, to the new opportunity? How do they use their mobilizing and organizing skill in a way that's financial to get our people in the game? Scott, what do you think?
Well, Al, I've said this a couple times. Capacity is an issue here. And I guess I would just ask each of my colleagues here, you know, is the money coming with the initiatives? Do you have enough capacity to go to scale? Because the days of, you know, folks have been disenfranchised so much, you might not want to go through City Hall to do business anymore, just because it's just been so hard. How are we getting out to the people to help them understand that there's a new day out here, there's new opportunity? If you can do a business, what the point we need to make is, if we can grow African-American businesses or other businesses of color, they tend to hire people that look like them. And so if we're trying to turn this around and we're saying, hey, we're guilty as charged, if we come up to the plate now, it seems to me that we got to go to first base and meet the people, and then send them to second, then send them around third and have them come home, because...
We're down to 30 seconds each. Just a closing word. I want to get a sense of your hope. I really hear and feel your passion, Velma Korbel, about the good things afoot in Minneapolis. But what do you want to say to our viewers and listeners?
I think what we have in the city of Minneapolis now are a lot of committed leaders, whether they're at the elected or appointed. We do have resources, and what we also have is collective impact. The relationships that have been built between the government sector, the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector are going to be invaluable in tackling this problem. And we just have to do it now. We just have to do it.
10 seconds. What's the word of the day for our listeners, for policymakers and consumers?
Opportunity. We have, from the very top in our government here in Minnesota, from the governor on down, the opportunity now to make a difference.
And Readus, you would second that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then, Scott, how do we take it? What do we do? Give me the 20-second recipe here. How do we make this happen from the community's point of view?
Well, we'd be intentional. I mean, the folks around this room are certainly intentional. I think Wanda's right, from the governor down. we're talking the same language, but we got to be intentional. Let's do some pilots. Let's start to work with folks in our community that can make this happen and grow it from there.
And we're out of time. Thank you all so very much for being here. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. This conversation we'll visit again. We'll come back to this. It's important, and we're going to make this happen. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We got to say goodnight. We want to thank Al McFarlane for bringing us all those great words and all our lovely guests, all the guests in the house. Everything's good, you know. So I want y'all to tune in every Tuesday morning, right around 9 o'clock. Because we're going to play us a song. All the guests will be home. We'll be feeling like talking. Have a robust conversation. All our guests in the house, 2 million people out there. I know you live